It starts in the softest way. You have a plan, a promise to yourself. Maybe it's waking up earlier. Maybe it's finishing that project you've delayed for months, or starting the thing that could change everything. But then something strange happens. You delay. You tell yourself you're not ready yet. You organize your files. You watch one more video. You feel the urge to be productive, but you can't seem to move forward. You become busy with everything except what actually matters. And the worst part, you know what you're doing. You feel the tension of it in your chest. The guilt seeps in before the day even ends. And you call it self-sabotage. Lazy, weak, undisciplined, maybe even broken. But what if that conclusion is not only wrong, but deeply unfair? What if this isn't sabotage? What if it's self-protection disguised as failure? Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Self-sabotage isn't random. It's patterned, and every pattern has a logic. It just doesn't always speak the language of your goals. It speaks the language of your wounds. You see, somewhere along the way, your brain learned that action leads to risk, visibility, rejection, disappointment, maybe even humiliation. To you, progress doesn't just mean growth, it also means exposure. And exposure, that's terrifying, because when you were young, success wasn't always safe. Maybe you tried your best and it still wasn't enough. Maybe you got mocked for standing out, or punished for wanting more. So now every time you try to move forward, that old story whispers, "Don't. It's not worth it. Stay small, stay hidden, stay safe." It's not weakness. It's wisdom learned in the wrong war, like a soldier who keeps ducking even after the battlefield is gone. Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once observed, "The greatest achievements of the human mind are generally received with distrust. But when distrust comes not from others, but from within, that's when you get stuck. Not because you lack ambition, but because ambition reminds you of the moments you were told it was dangerous to try. So you build castles in your mind and prisons around your heart. You want it, but you also want to survive it. And for the version of you who was once deeply hurt, survival will always come first." Think back not to the story you tell others, but to the moment you stopped telling it at all. Maybe you were 7, maybe 14, maybe it was last year, but it felt ancient. You raised your hand, you shared your idea, you asked for affection. And what came back wasn't connection. It was confusion, laughter, dismissal. That's when it started. The slow, quiet rewiring. Your body still remembers that sting, not just the words, but the meaning beneath them. It's not safe to be seen. And because your nervous system is elegant, beautifully adaptive, it built you armor. You stopped trying so hard. You told yourself, "It's fine, I didn't really want it anyway." You made yourself smaller before the world could shrink you. This wasn't sabotage, this was strategy. If you don't try, you don't fail. If you never open your heart fully, no one can crush it. If you never show them your truest self, their rejection doesn't hurt as much. You call it procrastination, but your nervous system calls it a firewall. A sophisticated, deeply human response to an early lesson. Vulnerability is dangerous. It doesn't matter that you're older now, that you've read the books, that you know better, because the part of you that learned that lesson wasn't logical. It was emotional, somatic, pre-verbal even. And emotional memories don't care about your calendar age. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "What was silent in the Father speaks in the Son, and often I found in the Son the unveiled secret of the Father." We inherit not just trauma, but the reflexes it teaches, the patterns of contraction, of delay, of self-withholding. And somewhere along the way you became two people, one who dreams, and one who's terrified that dream will destroy you. So now, every time you edge closer to growth, a quiet voice whispers, "Don't forget what happened last time." Because the truth is, trying again means remembering. And remembering hurts. It exposes the scar tissue of your past, the unreleased grief, the moments where your innocence met apathy or cruelty. You can't outthink it, you can't hustle your way past it, because this isn't about laziness. It's about fear dressed as logic. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And self-sabotage. It's not absurd. It's a quiet negotiation between your potential and your pain. You're not broken, you're brilliant. And until someone tells you that, you keep mistaking survival for shame. You think you're avoiding pain, but you end up living in it. You delay the conversation so you don't get hurt. And now you feel unknown, misunderstood, resentful. You don't apply for the job, don't send the message, don't start the thing you say you care about. Because failure would hurt, and yet now stagnation hurts more. This is the paradox. The very act meant to protect you slowly becomes the source of your suffering. You avoid intimacy because closeness once meant criticism. You numb your emotions because expression once led to rejection. You dismiss your own desires because wanting too much used to make people uncomfortable. At some point, your body decided it's safer to stay here in this familiar discomfort than to risk the unknown, even if that discomfort is a cage, even if the lock is internal. Zeno of Citium, founder of Stoicism, once wrote, "Man conquers the world by conquering himself." But how do you conquer what you've never learned to name? The fears beneath the silence, the memories beneath the resistance, the part of you that is still 5 years old, holding your breath and waiting to be chosen. Because that's what this really is. This isn't laziness, this is emotional encryption. A part of you learned that movement equals danger, so stillness became your shield. You thought you were choosing comfort. But really, you were choosing familiarity, because familiarity, however painful, feels safer than risk. And this is why willpower alone never works. You can't force your way through a defense mechanism your nervous system built to keep you alive. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." What you call self-sabotage is often just your body trying to avoid feeling again what once broke you. The resistance? It's not random, it's intelligent. It's the moment your finger hovers over send and your stomach tightens, because somewhere in your past, sending meant exposure. Exposure meant pain. It's the reason you make a plan and then avoid. It not because you don't care, but because following through would mean betting on yourself. And what if you lose? So your mind writes the story. I'm just not disciplined. I'm not built for this. I'm weak. But the truth is quieter and far more compassionate. The part of you holding back isn't trying to ruin your life. It's trying to protect your heart. And you don't heal that with self-criticism. You heal that with recognition, by realizing that all this time, your resistance has been a form of self-loyalty, just misdirected. The irony is almost poetic. You've been so loyal to your younger self's fear that you've abandoned your current self's potential. But this isn't your fault. This is adaptation. This is a nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do, keep you alive by keeping you safe. You don't need to yell at yourself to try harder. You need to listen to the fear underneath the stillness. Name it, hold it, let it soften, not because you forced it to, but because you finally saw it clearly. Carl Jung called it the shadow. The disowned self, the hidden impulses, buried fears, and repressed needs that live just beneath your surface. The parts you were told were too much or not enough. The moments you swallowed your truth to stay loved. The rage you suppressed to appear kind. The sadness you buried to stay functional. But here's the truth. The shadow doesn't disappear when ignored. It metastasizes. It shows up in subtle rebellion, procrastination, self-isolation, perfectionism so rigid it fractures your spirit, over-apologizing, under-expressing, laughing at things that aren't funny just to avoid tension. That's not weakness. That's the shadow in motion. Not evil, not broken, just scared. Scared of being seen and rejected again. Scared that if it steps into the light, it will be abandoned all over. But ironically, this hiding creates the very outcome you feared: disconnection, shame, stagnation. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." But the imagination is powerful. It creates emotional blueprints. You live not in the moment you're in, but in the memory of the moment that hurt you most. So you make jokes instead of saying what you mean. You ghost people before they can ghost you. You keep lowering your expectations so you won't be disappointed. This is what happens when the shadow leads. You sabotage not because you want to fail, but because failing on your terms feels safer than being blindsided. It's strategy. Flawed, yes, but intelligent, ancient even. Because once upon a time that strategy worked. Silence kept the peace, avoidance kept you from crying, performing kept you loved. But now you're here, and you don't need to live in those terms anymore. Alan Watts once said, "You are under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago." So what if you stopped seeing sabotage as the enemy and started seeing it as the exile? The part of you that wants to disappear, not because it hates you, but because it's exhausted from not being accepted. What if you made space at the table for that part? Not to let it drive the car, but to let it finally speak. To let it say, "I was never lazy. I was afraid. I wasn't cold. I was hurt. I didn't sabotage because I wanted to ruin it. I sabotaged because I didn't think I was worthy of it." This is the work. This is the beginning of integration. Machiavelli wrote, "It is much safer to be feared than loved if one must choose." But what if you didn't have to choose anymore? What if the parts of you that feel unlovable didn't need to be feared, exiled, or conquered, but heard, witnessed, held? The shadow doesn't dissolve through discipline. It softens through compassionate exposure. And that starts when you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What did I learn to do in order to survive?" You don't self-sabotage because you're broken. You self-sabotage because you were smart enough to survive. You made trade-offs between safety and self-expression, between approval and authenticity. And you made the best choice you could with the tools you had. That's not dysfunction, that's adaptation. But now, you're not in the same place anymore. You're not 7 years old, whispering your needs to a distracted room. You're not the teenager shrinking themselves to stay in someone's good graces. You're not the version of yourself who had to measure their worth by how little they needed. Now, you're here, and you're safe enough to ask, what if I no longer need the protection that costs me my peace? And Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. What if the patterns that feel like fate, the avoidance, the overthinking, the over-apologizing, what if they were never your destiny, just your defense? And what if now you're strong enough to put them down? You don't need to burn down the life you want just because it feels unfamiliar. You don't need to sabotage joy just to stay in control. You don't need to push people away just because closeness once cut you. Seneca reminded us, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And when you pause and look closely, you'll see much of your pain isn't about what's happening now. It's about what already happened, still echoing in your nervous system, still living in your muscle memory. A ghost of the past wearing the mask of the present. But ghosts lose their power when named. Patterns begin to fade when faced. The loop can end. Because you are allowed to want things and receive them. You are allowed to show up fully and still be safe. You are allowed to take up space, not because you've earned it, but because you exist. And yes, It might feel strange at first. It might feel fake, too soft, too vulnerable. But that discomfort, that's not danger. That's just new. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The trigger becomes the teacher. The fear becomes the compass. The sabotage becomes the signal. You're not your old defense mechanisms. You're not your outdated narratives. You're not your shadow, though it walks with you. You are the self that's emerging from it, clearer, softer, stronger. And that self deserves to win, not despite the past, but because you survived it. You outgrew what once kept you small. Now, let yourself take the next step, even when it feels unnatural, especially then, because healing doesn't always look like courage. Sometimes it just looks like not hiding anymore.